One of the questions that I found rather curious and worthy of intellectual pursuit is who would you put in the college football playoff if you had to choose between Alabama and Georgia? Regardless of what Georgia does this weekend, and if they beat Tennessee, this becomes a really interesting conversation, I still believe you're going to go with Alabama. And one of the reasons I think this is Alabama's 2 losses are really not as bad as you might think, and their wins are better than Georgia. Okay? So the way that I would unpack this is by simply first stating that Alabama has one opponent on its schedule that does not have a winning record. That's South Florida. The team they beat 63-0 to open the season, Western Kentucky, they're 7-2. Vanderbilt is good, and that helps them tremendously, right? At worst, Vanderbilt will finish the season 6-6, and they could end up with ranked wins to finish the season. Not to mention, Alabama's got wins against Missouri and South Carolina, who are both top 25 opponents who will play each other this weekend for basically what is the right to stay in the top 25 and or get bounced out of the top 25. South Carolina has turned out to be a really great football team that just is up and down. Missouri has really survived in ways that I didn't think were capable of, and they're going to get tested once again with Brady Cook being out. I still think that the reason that you're going to put an Alabama in over Georgia is right there too. Now, Georgia has a great win on the road against Texas, which is one of the 3 best teams in college football as far as I'm concerned. And the reason that we don't have Georgia at, say, 3 and Texas at 12 is frankly that game, right? You can see the chasm in between. And that loss matters, that extra loss that Georgia has to Ole Miss, that matters. But that also brings me back around to the reason why I think you would go with Alabama here. Alabama's got the head-to-head. And because Alabama has the head-to-head, I think you have to respect that. I think you have to respect that if neither one of those teams makes it into the SEC championship, you can't have both in the college football playoff as it is currently set up, especially knowing what Indiana has done so far, right? One of the things that I find interesting about that conversation is, do you think Georgia is a better football team than Indiana, assuming Indiana doesn't get a win against Ohio State and doesn't make the Big Ten championship game? And I think you would have to, because Indiana is playing complete football. They're good defensively and they're great offensively. They got the number 2 scoring offense in the country. They're also undefeated, and Georgia's got the 2 losses. I think for some folks, this is really open and shut because, hey, RJ, look at the records, man. Doesn't it matter that people win and lose games? And I normally would tell you, yes, I champion undefeated seasons. I champion everybody who wins every game on their schedule, regardless of strength of record, regardless of strength of schedule, for a couple of reasons. The first one is, when a team is ranked and you play them, and you beat them, they're probably not going to be ranked as highly or ranked at all a little bit later in the season. As an example here, Nebraska, who was a top 25 team, has not beaten a top 25 team since 2016, but also was 5-1 when they played Indiana, and Indiana dropped them 56-7. They've since not been very good. I can't hold that against Indiana, and I'm not really interested in talking about who's on your schedule outside of what league you play in, because the leagues themselves can be predictable. The people that are good in those leagues can be unpredictable. An example, we believe that the SEC and the Big Ten are the 2 most powerful conferences in football because they've got the best teams in football. Now, which one of those teams is going to be the best in any given year? That is becoming an open question, right? Michigan, the last 3 years, has been that team. This year, it feels like it's Oregon, right? Next year, it could be Ohio State, or it could even be Indiana. Looking at the SEC, you didn't expect Vanderbilt to be out of the cellar dweller and then doubling up the state of Alabama with the state championship with wins against Alabama and Auburn in the same year. You also, quite frankly, didn't expect Oklahoma to be sorry, even if you did expect Oklahoma to be not great, right? Texas being Texas, many people were predicting that based on what they did last year. But through the middle, Ole Miss, South Carolina, teams LSU, teams like that, are still right there, right? And it would not shock any of us to find out that Ole Miss, LSU, joining A&M and Tennessee as really jockeying for top spot, because given what those programs have shown over the last 50, 100 years, you kind of expect that they're not always going to be down. Even a team like Texas A&M, who hasn't won a conference championship since 1998, is in position to play for the SEC championship, perhaps against Tennessee. Tennessee can get this win on the road at Georgia. I do know that a 3-loss Georgia is not automatically out, even if we can agree that they're mostly out, because, again, this college football playoff selection committee is unpredictable, and they've done some things that really have us scratching our heads. And when I go to grade them, I'm going, is it that you guys aren't watching the same sport? Because I don't know what you're valuing here. You're valuing Penn State ahead of Indiana, for instance, and Penn State's got the loss to Ohio State. Its best win is Illinois. Illinois is a good football team. It's not a great football team. And to say nothing of, there are other teams that I think could beat Penn State, and most of them don't have to rank in the top 5, but if they did rank in the top 5, it's kind of like Nebraska. Show me the last time that Penn State beat a top 5 team, and I will point you to 2016. I will also point you to James Franklin's 1-13 against top 5 programs. Those things got to matter at some point, right? Especially when we're making these matchups that might seed a 6 versus 11, a 5 versus 12, so forth, so on, 7 versus 10. I'm back to Alabama is purporting itself like a team that is going to make the college football playoff. They got Mercer, which is nobody, but they should win. And then they got, a couple games to end out in Oklahoma and Auburn that they should also win. So if you are Bama, you got to feel good about your chances of making the playoff. And if you're Georgia, you got to win against Tennessee to give everybody the opportunity to debate whether or not it's Alabama or Georgia as we get closer and closer to the 12-team field filling out. I also think that, as I'm trying to parse these things, and I am taking into account these wins and loss totals and who you played and how you played them and when you played them and whether or not teams get better or worse over the course of the season, how injuries impact, I really want to go back to head-to-head, and I really want to say, did you beat this team straight up? Do we think that it's a fair fight the other way? And if we do, we're not talking about teams that are making the college football playoff in a 14 format. We're talking about teams that are making it in 12. I think the other thing that could really upset this is, what does SMU do the rest of the way? As they go undefeated or they beat Miami in the ACC championship game. What does Clemson do against Pitt? Because Pitt started off 7-0 and they've lost their last 2. They're trying to avoid a 3-game losing streak. And Clemson desperately needs the win just to stay in contention for the ACC championship if Miami or SMU were to drop a game between now and then. And they could, right? It's not out of the realm of possibility. And while I think that Georgia is going to beat Georgia Tech, this Georgia Tech program has shown it ain't going to lay down for nobody. So you better be coming with the come on when it's time to go play them. This is when I think the sport is really getting to be a lot more fun. And one of the reasons I think we should still think about expanding to 16 teams, because we're still having an argument about who needs to get in and how they should get in, when really we would love to put both Alabama and Georgia into the field. It's just the field has to be big enough to accommodate those teams. And the only way I can see you doing that and being fair to the ACC, the Big 12, and the Big 10, even if you only want to put one team for each one of those other 2 schools in, is to expand to 16, especially as we're competing with Washington State not getting to play for a conference championship for at least another year, and they might go 11-1 and get left out. Notre Dame, who doesn't play for a conference championship, might go 11-1, get put in this year, but we're going to have the same discussion next year because we treat Notre Dame like it does play for a Power 4 championship, and we don't treat other independents the same way. And then my favorite part about this is Army and Navy are good, and while Navy's probably not going to make the college football playoff this year, Army most definitely could if they're the highest ranked Group of 5 champion, which would probably knock out, no, not probably, it would knock out Boise State, which means we wouldn't get to see Ashton Genty play in the college football playoffs, which would suck because we would really like to see that too. Again, 16 teams is where I think we should be. I'm sure that there are those that agree and those that don't. You let me know what you think in the comments below. And since you are here and you made it to this point in the segment, please consider subscribing to the #1 college football show right here on the YouTubes, pushing toward 117,000 subscribers.